Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this second edition of our Bardi Interviews. Let me introduce this evening's guest, someone you all know. That's the leader of the Bardi Symphony Orchestra, or should it be concertmaster? It seems to be becoming a popular term these days. That's Adam Summerhayes. Good evening, Adam.
Hello.
Do you prefer concertmaster or leader?
Oh, I'm definitely not a concertmaster. That sounds as if I would know what I was doing far too much. Leading could be.
Let's start off with your beginnings. Do you come from a musical family?
Yes and no. My parents are not musical, or at least didn't do anything musical. My grandfather was indeed musical. He went from being a fish merchant's son to going to the Royal Manchester, whatever it was called, Conservatoire or something, and studied with the guy who premiered the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. And I had my first violin lessons from him. In fact, many others used to have hours-long violin lessons, 4 or 5 hours sometimes.
Was the violin the first instrument you picked up?
Yeah, definitely. In my bedroom as a child, there was a very small kind of 16th size, or maybe 32nd size, I think, old violin. It was quite a rare thing, actually. I'm surprised anybody sold it. That's a dig at my parents. And it was put on the, what they call it, pelmet, saying above the curtains, where any child worth their salt would try and get it down. So at some extremely small age, like 5 or something, I did get it down, as I recall, and scraped hideously away at it and fell in love with the whole concept.
So fate brought the instrument and the man together, but at what stage, at what age did you sort of think to yourself, well, I'd really like to devote myself to this instrument and perhaps make my living from
it? I don't think I ever understood the concept of making a living from it. Still don't really. But I think I'd certainly remember by the time we were at primary school and they did the thing of going around and what are you going to be? And people were saying policeman and bus driver, and I was saying violinist. So sometime before that.
So quite early on then.
Yeah, very much so. I think my career choices started off as mother's cook, a racing driver, and then violinist, all before I was 7.
So you had these early lessons then, but what happened after? I mean, you remember the LSSO, I think.
Oh yeah, being in Leicestershire then was an amazing lucky break. I mean, we were only there because Dad was working at a company there, and so that's where we'd moved to when I was young. Stayed there. They still live there now, but we could have been anywhere in the country at that point, depending where he got that job. And Leicestershire was. It had probably passed its absolute heyday with Pinkett and everybody, but it was still an astonishing system of instrumental teaching in schools, peripatetic lessons, incredible support from the director of music, but I can't think what you called it, but the bloke in charge of education in Leicester then was incredibly supportive. So there was a lot being done for people. The orchestra system was absolutely extraordinary. I was on this special music course thing eventually at the Rowans in the middle of Leicester. So it was like a 6th form music course, and that was incredible. I learned more about music there than I did throughout the rest of my time at music college.
We'll talk a little more about that after we've heard some music, and we've asked you to choose 8 pieces of music.
God, is that me? Yes.
Oh dear, what's the matter?
Oh, well, no, I seem to have, well, my hair's a different colour. That's what it is. It looks dyed. Do carry on.
I thought something horrible had happened to your screen. I do beg your
pardon. No. It just demonstrates that age is not necessarily a good thing.
Anyway. We have asked you to choose some music, and for the last 4 selections, we've got some videos as well, which I think are really wonderful. But your first choice is part of Vaughan Williams' Sixth Symphony. Now, why have you chosen this?
Well, all of these choices, it turns out, it's a funny thing being asked to do this, to think of important music to you is how I read it, because the whole thing about music turned out to be very wrapped up in family for me. it looks on the face of it, the choices I've made divide a little bit into two halves, but it's not true. They all come from the same starting point. Apart from Grandpa, who was a big influence in me wanting to play the violin. He was an amazing guy and I wanted to be like him, I imagine. But once it became apparent that I was really interested in music, I used to be given, in fact, it might have been before that, to go to sleep at night. Dad used to make these little cassette tapes. Sometimes there were cassettes of him telling bedtime stories that he'd made up, and sometimes it was music, sometimes it was folk music, Joan Baez, Simon and Garfunkel, all sorts of things. Amazing stuff, some of it. But some of it was classical music, and I have no idea what led him to find the things he was finding, but some of them were extraordinary. So I would be going to sleep with Stravinsky, Tchaikovsky, a bit more obviously, some Vaughan Williams, some really wild things sometimes. Classical music. Didn't actually go to sleep much, mostly listened, which I'm not sure was the point. So the whole, it turns out that both that classical and that folk music has been an enormous part of influencing what it turns out that I've become as a musician, what I've loved, what I like. So
well, here's hoping, Adam, that you don't fall asleep as we listen to part of this wonderful Vaughan Williams Symphony Number 6. Well, that was the opening of the Symphony Number 6 by Vaughan Williams, Sir Adrian Boult and the London Symphony Orchestra, and quite an early recording there. That's like a bit rough around the edges, really, I think.
Well, I think it probably induced panic in the string players. It's not easy. And they probably weren't expecting that from Vaughan Williams as they came along to the first rehearsal, because he didn't always write quite demanding music. Yes, well, the reason it's come as my first choice here is because I think the first time I played it was with the Bardi Orchestra, but certainly the most memorable because it was in the days of Andrew Constantine, and we came to the end of the symphony and he'd organized that as the final chords died away, I would just stand up from the leader's seat and go straight into the Lark Ascending, which was a totally amazing conjunction and worked brilliantly, I think. But, you know, I've said these whole things about family in a way. My memory is getting to the end of the Lark Ascending, and then this tiny creature, probably about that big, I should think, which was my daughter at the age of slightly under 2, I think, toddled onto stage with a bunch of flowers the size of me and gave it to me. And the combination of doing that piece, the Lark Ascending, and then that was quite emotional, actually.
Overwhelming.
Overwhelming, that's what it was. And then there was the second half, about which I remember nothing.
Now, Adam, we were talking about your being a member of the LSSO. Can you remember any of the pieces that you did with them? Any particularly memorable concerts that you did?
Oh, goodness. Well, I remember doing Scheherazade, which was a very noticeable moment because there's a massive violin solo. I also noticed there's a picture of me there with a dodo sitting on my head, which has got nothing to do with the LSSO. It was a very amusing moment at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with my Dodo Street band, which is a kind of folk-ish kind of thing. I also remember doing Don Juan with them. We did Till Oil and Spiegel, we did Shostakovich 10, but Don Juan was funny because I had been using, there's a big violin solo in that as well. It starts with a big up bow, something, or at least that happens early on in it. And I had been using a bow of my grandfather's, which had been made specifically for his uncle or something by Tubbs, which was a beautiful bow. And it was a little bit longer than a normal violin bow. And just before the concert, for some reason or other, I'd changed back to a normal length violin bow. So I went to start and nothing happened at all because the tip of the bow had got stuck between the A and the B strings. So I was going, so I remember that one.
Were you a member of the orchestra when Tippett was involved with this?
Well, I would have said no to this until Rob sent a photo earlier in the week, which clearly shows me on stage with Tippett. So I'm going to say yes.
But it doesn't bring back vivid memories.
Well, after seeing the photograph, memories did gradually trickle in. I remember he had some very curious yellowish like plimsolly shoes with no socks, which in those days was very unusual. That's my memory.
Well, he was a loud dresser, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, that's my only memory. I don't remember anything other than the shoes.
I mean, it must have been wonderful for an orchestra like that to have Tippett being involved. I mean, one of the great composers of the post-war period, and indeed he composed the Shire Suite.
Yeah, which apparently is what we were playing.
Yeah,
but it has to be said that I remember less of it than I feel I should. It should have been an amazing thing, and it probably was, but there have been so many amazing things, and I'm so feeble-minded that I've forgotten.
It's a pity, really, because I mean, I've somewhere got the LSSO recording of the Shire Suite, but it's never actually been professionally recorded. Yeah. And, you know, that's a big piece by a great composer. And I know that perhaps his reputation isn't quite what it was once upon a time. It seems a pity that it's not really more readily available.
It certainly does. I wonder if his reputation will come back. I think his music, a lot of it is brilliant. So
I entirely agree. I think his symphonies are being newly recorded, and perhaps there will be a slow revival of interest in his music. I do hope so.
Well, I've just remembered something about it.
Oh, good.
I've remembered that in rehearsals, the poor principal clarinetist had absolutely no concept of how to deal with the rhythm and had to be taken away for separate sectionals. I can't remember who that was, though, so no names, fortunately.
Well, I'm not surprised with Tippett, because rhythmically he is sometimes slightly difficult, isn't he? And there's a very bizarre picture has appeared on the screen, and I'm wondering whether that brings back any memories for you.
That, to me, in many ways, sums up my life touring over the last, I don't know, obviously not the last 2 years, because there hasn't been a live touring, but before that, I've been touring with Red Priest for I don't know, 5 years or something. And that is a typical airport scene taken with my camera, which, as you realize, your phone should not be out. So I don't know how I got away with that. But boots off, that's my little blowy thing that I use in Red Priest concerts. I can't remember what it's called. It's called a melodeon, but it's really some kind of melodica type thing. Yeah, that's just life. Get to an airport, put your melodica in the thing with your boots, and then go off on stage like that.
Well, this is a little later, but as we've got the pictures today, I was looking through my CD. I knew I'd got a Red Priest album somewhere and fished it out, but unfortunately this was before you joined them.
Yes.
So what year did you join Red Priest?
I'm not quite sure. I definitely have done at least 5 years touring with them before this happened. So however many years ago that is, 7 years ago. And that's the album I've recorded with them. We did just record another before all the lockdown and everything happened, but we haven't put it together because there seems very little point putting together an album because you sell them at concerts, and we've got none. That was the Baroque Bohemians album. They asked me to join the group in not great circumstances, because Julia Bishop had severe health problems. She's absolutely fine now, I'm delighted to say, but I had to step in for her. And then after a year or so, that became the fait accompli. And along the way, Piers was very interested in doing a Gypsy Baroque program, which by chance was something that I'd already thought of a few years before, but hadn't done anything about. So I basically wrote and arranged that program, which we toured. We did a great Metropolitan Museum concert in New York with it. We played in Beijing. We went all over the place. It was good fun.
Well, we should say that for those who don't know, that Red Priest, you do very out of the ordinary, unconventional performances, often of Baroque music, Vivaldi, and all sorts. Do you ever get people who are rather upset that you're not more straightforward and play the thing in inverted commas properly?
Well, to be honest, if somebody's managed to get along to a Red Priest concert without noticing it's not going to be like that, then more fool them. But yes, there was one excellent concert where somebody walked out in high dudgeon from the front row. That was Angela, the cellist's arrangement of the Messiah, which but anybody who's come to a quartet version of the Messiah, you can't expect it to be the Messiah. because I mean, anyway, yes, it is. I mean, it's extremely radical in its approach.
Yeah.
It's sometimes a little bit ludicrous. It's always extremely good fun, and Piers is the most extraordinary musician and virtuoso. So it's been a blast.
Well, I mean, I think you put your finger on it. Good fun, because I've never actually seen Red Priest, but I've heard CDs of them, and the good fun comes across through the loudspeakers.
Yes, which is quite an achievement and shows the kind of power of what they do. It's a shame. I mean, the year before all this not doing anything happened, we'd been we were in New Zealand, New York. We were meant to be going to Russia, but we didn't make it because of what happened. I mean, I'd travelled, I think I was starting to work it out, but I'd got to it twice around the world, and I was trying to remember the little journeys that I'd forgotten about, like Finland and places. And suddenly now I don't know whether we'll be doing that again. It's not obvious.
No, these are very, well, everyone says it, it's a cliche now, these are very strange times.
Very strange times.
I'm not quite sure what will happen, really.
Not at all, not at all.
Adam, before we leave the LSSO, you were saying before we heard from Vaughan Williams that you know, you look back and all sorts of extraordinary things happen. But what do you think you learned from being in the LSSO?
I learned this in the same way as I talked about the special music course at the Rowans, teaching me more than I ever learned at music college. By the time I finished the LSSO and had led it for the final year or whatever it was I led it for, I knew so much more about good orchestral playing and how it functioned and how it should function than really, as far as I could tell, anybody at college. And we certainly didn't get taught anything else. So then the learning curve only began again once I became director of a small chamber orchestra later, at which point, of course, there's loads more to learn. But it put me in an enormously good place for just how to make things function well and to understand really more than anything the power of listening, because something about the way of doing LSSO rehearsals, you sat through it endlessly for Saturday mornings, wishing you'd remembered to eat a bit more breakfast and wondering when it was going to be time to eat a Kit Kat, as I recall. And hearing over and over again deep incompetence happening around you or from you as you tried to sort this stuff out. But in the end, you really knew the music. And in the end, it was extremely good. So you learned to listen in a quite profound way, really.
Your next choice of music, again, takes us back to your boyhood, I think.
It does, yes.
This is incredible piece, The Rite of Spring, which I remember Bardi doing. And you've asked for a recording of this. Just explain why.
Well, it's the same reason as everybody else from my generation. It was Fantasia, the Walt Disney thing. Such an amazing, brilliant thing to meet classical music through. Of course, I knew classical music already, but I was still very young when I first came across it. And the dinosaur music, as The Rite of Spring should rightly be known, was just extraordinarily brilliant and wonderful. I never heard anything like it before. And then going on to the Dance of Spring bit or whatever it's called, the pop, 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 just unbelievable stuff, fantastic. So I have always absolutely loved it. It was first time I ever played it was with Bardi, so that was also a great pleasure.
So let's hear it. It's the opening, I think we're hearing, The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, and this is the LSO conducted by Simon Rattle. The Rite of Spring, conducted by Simon Rattle, the London Symphony Orchestra. And it's often been said, hasn't it, Adam, that it was a very bold thing for the Walt Disney Corporation to put a piece of, well, modern music into a popular cartoon in the way that he did.
Well, not just modern music, but something that had caused a riot not very many years before. Makes it extraordinary. That wasn't the opening, by the way, in case anybody's...
Oh, sorry, yes, I know.
There hasn't been a new cut version released, as far as I know.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
But it is a good bit, and it's got opening sound bits in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to make a kids' cartoon with something that literally had caused a riot in the streets of Paris, or at least in a theatre, is brave and remarkable. But it was such a triumphant success.
One of the things that's extraordinary about, you've mentioned that the Bardi have done it, the early recordings of the Rite of Spring, you can hear the orchestra really straining and bad notes and wrong entries, and they're having huge difficulty in playing it. And now a non-professional orchestra can play it incredibly well.
Well, I think we struggled a bit as well. There may have been a lot of wrong notes.
But I just wonder, is it perhaps rather a pity that for a professional orchestra, the Rite of Spring has become, you know, an old war horse that can take out for a canter, when it ought to sound awkward and difficult and on the edge?
I don't know. I half agree with you. I don't think anybody would want it to sound awkward and difficult.
No.
But the sense of excitement and good God, what is this I'm playing? Should be. So it's great to have the proficiency to actually do what's in the score and bring it to life. But yeah, to really hear the terror of first meeting it and the excitement of those who could play it but were still first meeting it and thinking, wow, what is this? That would be something we won't really hear. And to get the two together would be fantastic. But with proficiency comes complacency, I suppose.
So you went to music college in London, I take it?
Yeah, I went to the Guildhall. Actually, I went to the Royal Academy first because I had the Guildhall. Oh no, I had a scholarship to all of them. For some reason, I went to the Royal Academy, and then my teacher was lovely, but I didn't feel as if I was playing. I wanted to sound like Itzhak Perlman. And after 8 weeks, I didn't sound any more like Itzhak Perlman than I had when I arrived. And I met my wife, my now wife. She wasn't my wife then because that would have been a bit weird. I met her very early on, and her father was a very fine violinist who had learned with Max Rostal and Ephraim Niemann. Ephraim Niemann was a big professor at the Guildhall. Her father had links and said, look, you should go and play to him. He really knows the stuff you are wanting to learn. So I paddled along, had some kind of trial lesson with Ephraim, thought, yes, this is what I want to know. Because basically he said, well, everything you're doing is great in its way, but intrinsically built on sand. You need to deal with a few things. And showed me stuff that immediately, a change of sound, which is what you get from Perlman, just different things with the bowing immediately, even though it took me a long time to really master it, you could tell immediately it was different. So I then went home, called my dad and said, look, I need to change college. And he said, bloody hell, you better hurry up then, because this was still before Christmas in the first year. And then I then had a conversation with the director of education in Leicester saying, look, I'm going to change college because blah, blah, blah. And he said, fine, we'll rubber stamp that, because in those days they were paying for things that people don't get anymore. I then wrote a letter to the Royal Academy saying, sorry, but I'm moving. And they said, no, you can't. You absolutely can't. Your grant won't follow you, blah, blah, blah. And I said, but I've already sorted that out. So I then went to the Guildhall. And
there's a picture of you. I presume it's you on the screen. When was that taken? Do you know?
That is actually in the O2 arena, playing to 20,000 people with the Dutch pop superstar Caro Emerald, which I toured with her for I think 8 months or something, which I played to more people than I ever have before or ever will again in a very short time. I was the featured violin soloist. It was great fun. It's nothing quite like having 20,000 people going, and you finish your solo. Definitely better than Bardi from that point of view.
How did you get that gig then?
Well, this comes back to kind of folky stuff. I was doing some folky stuff in Glastonbury. And I'd gone along to a little cafe with my friend who was a guitarist and singer, and we were playing this ludicrous thing where I was just whizzing around the violin as fast as humanly possible. And then in the audience, it turned out, was a lovely girl, a double bass player who used to be in the orchestra I directed then, and her bloke, who is a big deal in the pop world and is Caro Emerald's MD. And he said, but didn't say anything then, but a few weeks later I got a call saying, right, would you like to do a tour with us? So I did, because it was
wonderful. The right place at the right time.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
Go back to something you said a moment ago, that you want to sound like...
horrifying picture. Oh God, that's 2 horrifying pictures in one. Oh no, sorry, John, carry on.
We'll come back to the picture in a moment. You wanted to sound like Itzhak Perlman.
Yes.
And I'm always fascinated when musicians talk about the people, you know, who are their heroes because they have a certain sound or they do things in a certain way. What specifically was it about that great violinist's performances that you really enjoyed?
You've put your finger on it, the sound. It literally the sound. The thing that I have always loved about the violin is just its noise. I don't really care what music I'm playing up to a point. There are contemporary exceptions to that. It's just being really able to draw something out of it, and particularly the sound on the G string and on my very beautiful fiddle, which you can see lying there on a table without its fingerboard. The note around E on the G string has just got a sound that I'm totally in love with, the timbre of the violin. And that is a timbre that if you really squash down and dig into it, comes out. And that's what Perlman has. His sound is just beyond anybody's. There's something about the way his arm connects, the fingers connect, that it's fat and amazing. Not everything he does musically is what I would do if I had the choice, but he, just from a pure sound point of view, that's just how it's done, as far as I'm concerned.
It's very interesting, isn't it? You can have, I'm sure, people who are technically incredibly proficient, but somehow don't play the music that the notes are gesturing at.
Well, there is that.
And there is that mystery of the difference between a perfectly technically acceptable performance and one which has got the magic of musical performance.
Yeah, it's something about you yourself being connected with what you're doing at the moment you do it, which is something I'm very much, well, very interested in. And when I perform well, which isn't always, that's something I feel as if I manage to achieve, that I do manage to get a connection between what's coming out and what's going in just in the moment. Leads a lot to the kind of music I'm trying to do these days, with which we'll hear some of later.
You just mentioned those pictures.
Yes, I should.
You were cringing. Explain what they show.
Well, the one on the left shows a horrifying moment in a large hall in Guernsey. I played there with Red Priest actually a couple of years later, or a year later. But this was with my friend Murray Granger, and we were doing a program of essentially medieval melodies, but our own totally wild arrangements of them. And it's amplified, not in a silly way, but just because there needed to be some amplification to, I can't remember quite why. Oh, because some of the instruments playing Baroque guitars and things as well. It's just a duo, but I played the Baroque guitars. And my violin was on a wire. I put it on the table, forgetting that the wire went into a battery pack in my pocket. Walked along it to go off stage after the first half, I think. And oh no, it was in the rehearsal. That's right. It was just the end of the rehearsal, just we'd finished. And Murray failed to catch it and it broke. His fault entirely. Whereas the other one is Red Priest on tour somewhere, and something dire and desperate has happened, which I can't remember, but it seems to involve a knife and my sound post.
Yeah, we won't inquire too much about that. But whilst we're on the subject of violins, let's hear your third piece, because this is a violin concerto. Explain about this, please.
Oh, well, this is Bartok's Violin Concerto, which goes back to the tapes that my dad had given me to listen to. And I used to listen to this one over and over and over again. It was a strange conjunction. It went from Bartok Concerto into Vaughan Williams' Concerto Academico. So for a long time, they were linked in my mind in an entirely bogus way. But the recording was Perlman, and it was absolutely wonderful. I looked for the Perlman recording on YouTube, and it is there, but only in a ghastly poor quality upload. So I chose this one by Stern, which it was interesting, actually. I've never played this concerto, so I've only ever heard it. And I was listening, and then I was just looking at the score, and every player, it goes da, 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 runs, land on the first beat. Everybody, Perlman included, beautiful though his recording is, it's early. It's almost a half a beat early, over and over again. And Stern was the only person who plays it almost on the right beat, so he got it by default.
So full marks to Mr. Stern.
Absolutely.
And indeed the New York Philharmonic conducted by Leonard Bernstein, Bartok's Violin Concerto. Part of Bartok's Violin Concerto. Adam, you've said that you've never played that. Do you have a sort of a list of concertos that you would at some point, if possible, like to play?
Well, there are two really of the big 20th century concertos I'd like to play. The Prokofiev first concerto I haven't played, which I love, and the Bartok I would love to do. It's horrifically difficult for orchestra though, which means people are very unwilling to put it on, understandably. For me, actually, though, to be honest, I'd be perfectly happy just to play the first minute and a half. That by the time the harp finishes and then the first phrase from the violin, that's just glorious. Then I could just stop.
We'll see what we can do for you. Let's go back to your being taught the violin, because again, this is something that rather intrigues me. What does teaching consist of? Is it the teacher giving you tips about things, or is it something rather more than that?
I don't know. I had, I think, three teachers who stand out. One was my grandpa, whose teaching methods were slightly autocratic and terrifying. But I also used to have immeasurable, I learned more from him than you could imagine, really, from something we used to do that was just for fun. We used to just sit down and we'd play for 3 or 4 hours just through the entire repertoire of violin duos. So when I was younger, the easier ones, but there's some extraordinarily hard stuff which we used to play later on. And that was learning by osmosis in a way. He actually taught me to play the viola, which I don't do very much anymore because I haven't got a nice one. But I recorded a premiere recording of Alan Bush's Viola Sonata to, I have to say, very nice critical review. And he taught me to play the viola by saying, right, here's a viola, which was an enormous one. It's about 17 inches. I could barely reach the end of it. They're normally, well, some of them are 15 and a half, but 16 might be normal, maybe a little longer. And he said, right, that's a G, pointing to the Mozart violin and viola duets, viola part, which has a G octave at the beginning. And, well, you know, that's the D string, the G string. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I played the first note and about 2 other notes. And then every now and again he would call out, we're at letter B. So the first performance of the violin and viola duets by Mozart with me in it had about 7 notes from me. But by the time a week later had come, I could read viola clef. So that's teaching in an extremely strange way. Jimmy Walker at Leicestershire School of Music was a fantastic teacher for, he had so many practice techniques of, okay, you've got to play this hard passage. If you break it up like this and do this to it first, and then this, and then this, and then the other, and repeat that, you will be able to play it. And that was like magic, because instead of just batting your head against the brick wall and still being rubbish, you just did this set of things. And then at the end thought, wow, that was clever. So he was great. And then Ephraim Neiman, who was very much more, well, obviously musical stuff as well. But for me, it was just about very detailed. Well, look, if the balance here is like that, and that bit does this, and your elbow's like that, and you move like that, listen to the difference. So teaching is those things? I don't know, really.
And do you learn by listening to recordings?
No.
You don't?
I don't learn at all anymore.
Or did you? Let's put it that way.
No, I didn't. I'm not a very good learner, really, I don't think. I certainly heard a lot of recordings, and eventually something would make a difference to me one way or another, but I don't have a brain that will listen to something and say, oh, okay, so I want to do that and I shall therefore do this. Either it comes from what's already filtered through or it doesn't happen.
Well, let's hear some more music now. And I can't tell you how pleased I am that you've chosen this piece of music, because it's by one of my very favorite composers, and that's Janacek. And I well remember the Sinfonietta, which we're going to hear a bit of now, being played by the Bardi, and it never fails to make an extraordinary impression.
For me too. I didn't know that piece until I did it with the Bardi. I was absolutely blown away with it. I knew some other Janacek, which I liked very much, but that was just extraordinary, and certainly made me wonder why I didn't play the trumpet or something more useful.
Well, let's just hear part then of Janacek's Sinfonietta. Oh, that is just wonderful, isn't it?
It's better live, just to be actually, well, on stage with it or in a hall with it. It's just visceral.
Visceral is the word, isn't it? Visceral is the word. And I don't quite understand why Janacek is not considered, you know, right up there with Stravinsky as a 20th century composer. I think he's just wonderful.
I think he is up there.
He's not performed as much, though, is he?
No, he has very large orchestras, which doesn't. Yeah, as soon as you have to have 732 trumpets, it's not as easy to put on, and I think that unfortunately makes a big difference.
Yes, it's the practicality of the thing rather than the musicality of the thing, which is the problem, isn't it?
And maybe he hadn't had as many years in the bag as core repertoire before it became harder to put on big orchestras.
Yeah. You're probably right, but another thing extraordinary about him was that he wrote all the pieces that he's best known for, and his masterpieces really, in about the last 10, 12 years of his life. Quite extraordinary. Because he was inspired by falling in love with a young lady much younger than himself who was married, and I don't think she had any sense that this old chap was sort of writing all this music inspired by her, you know. But
you know more than I do. But she must have been quite somebody by the sounds of it.
Oh, he had a kind of wisdom, I think, and it comes through in his music. But anyway, we must move on a little bit. After you've been through college, of course, you have to work your way in the professional world, and just briefly, what did you do and how did it come about?
Well, straight out of college, I started I did loads and loads of 4 seasons in St Martin in the Fields, and directing a small orchestra there, which I don't remember the name of, but it was basically tourist concerts, but they were packed out and it was a good orchestra and it worked as far as it did. At the same time, my wife and I, she's a beautiful pianist, and we had a violin and piano duo. And somewhere along the way, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, that we were doing that for a good while, trying to do beautiful things with it. And then I took over directing London Concertante, which was for a while, it was probably England's busiest chamber group. It flexed between being down to a sextet up to, I don't know, small chamber ensemble, 15, 16 people. And we did stuff all around England. It was very much in demand. And I did loads of concertos with that, toured America doing the 4 seasons with them, that kind of thing. At the same time, Catherine and I recorded, we did a premiere recording of Aaron Copland music, duo and trio with a cellist. And then recordings of Alan Bush, again, lots of premiere stuff, some premiere English romantic piano trios. Then I ran a contemporary music thing in the South Bank for a couple of years, doing music for violin and piano duo. It was a competition, people wrote stuff, we played it. All that time I was doing concertante, and the picture on the screen there, which I pointed at, but it's completely pointless because you can't see where I'm pointing, but I'm pointing anyway. That was Zoom, which was a kind of offshoot to London Concertante initially, and became the world's first ever gypsy tango band. We toured well, one year we came straight back from Alaska and went to Saudi Arabia, which was quite quite radical. What else? Bardi through that time.
So when did you first join the when did you first become the leader of the Bardi?
Well, I was discussing this with Rob because I wasn't very sure, and the records are a little bit hazy. But I think the first time I led the Bardi was probably in my first year at college, so 1988. I don't really remember if that was a one-off or if I carried on doing it then, but I definitely led for a little while. Then there was a collaboration with Jagdish Mistry from the Mystery Quartet for a while, a wonderful bloke and a wonderful player. And he led for a little while. Then I've been on and off leading ever since, apart from a short period after I've more or less chopped my thumb off, I just remembered.
Well, perhaps we ought to examine that because it would be too painful.
No,
wonderful pictures on the screen now. Can you remember where they were? I think
one looks a lot like Prague.
I think the one at the top is Prague. Isn't it?
I would say the one at the top is Prague as well.
Yeah.
Could be wrong. Not sure about the one on the left, and the one on the right looks as if it's the Hermitage Theatre in St. Petersburg with me doing the Beethoven Concerto.
Well, I remember very well that wonderful last concert in Prague, at the concert hall in Prague, where indeed you did yet again Scheherazade, but it was a superb concert and got a rapturous reception.
Good. I don't remember doing Scheherazade. I remember doing the Bruch Concerto in the Rudolph Phenum and Mariansky Lasny, which was the two different places you could possibly get. Mariansky Lasny was actually I might have played the Lark Ascending there, I can't remember, something. Totally carpeted conference hall, sound just stopped by your violin. Yes. Whereas the Rudolph Phenum, the sound was absolutely everywhere. That was weird.
I remember that. Now, you've mentioned during the course of this conversation that you love all sorts of styles of music, and you've mentioned Red Priest, and you've mentioned Zum, but you've also been involved in all sorts of other groups as well, Lightning Thieves, Ciderhouse Rebellion, and so on and so forth. And we're going to sort of move on and talk a little bit about these other styles of music.
Well,
do you find them very different from classical music?
No, because essentially what I talked about in the beginning, that for me it all came from the same place. It's the music I listened to so much when I was young. For me, that was just music, and the violin is just a voice, if you like. Okay, it's a voice that can wriggle around a bit faster than you could perhaps sing, and there's technical stuff involved, but everything you play you have to play the right thing for what it is. So it's the same for the violin, whether it's folk music, a tango, or Beethoven Violin Concerto. You still have to fulfill kind of the obligations that music places on you. And ideally, that happens without you having to think about it. It happens because you intrinsically understand that style, and so you'll automatically do the right thing. So for me, I've always absolutely loved and adored folk music of certain types, not everything, absolutely. I don't like the diddly pom stuff much, but I don't play that. And I'd started to do a variety of, after Zum, I've done a variety of other interesting folky sort of projects. The Dodo Street Band was absolutely amazing. That was with Piers from Red Priest, but playing kind of Celtic gypsy klezmer stuff. I did an album called Stone Soup with a guy called Cormac Byrne, who's an astonishing baron player, the Irish drum. We did a duo album, which is fantastic. And just before the world went wrong, I was doing stuff with Murray Granger, a fantastic accordionist. If you imagine everything you think about what an accordion sounds like and then forget the whole thing, and then imagine instead a beautiful string orchestra in a gorgeous acoustic, and somehow he makes an accordion sound like that. It's an amazing thing to play with. And we were doing some stuff together, formed the Ciderhouse Rebellion, named, by the way, in rebellion against the increasingly hoppy nature of real ale over the last few years, which I don't like.
We'll hear from Ciderhouse Rebellion in a moment. But first of all, you've mentioned Murray Granger, and we're going to hear him and you and a wonderful singer,
yes,
Donnery in the Haar. Now,
yeah, I'll just tell you. I'll tell you very quickly why. So going back to the tapes that I used to listen to, wonderful singers, but instead of going back to try and find something that I'd have known from them, I thought, well, actually, I've finally, after so many years, managed to become involved in something that for me is right at the top of that tree. I was in, what's the place called? Ireland. I was in Ireland, on an island in Ireland, in Ishir, in fact, one of the Aran Islands, with Cormac, the drummer you can see in the picture there, after we'd been doing something at a Bowron festival. And we went into the pub, and Molly sang an unaccompanied Gaelic thing, and her voice was just stunning. And it's the voice I've been wanting to find it's always been a dream of mine to do something with a really true, proper folk singer voice, where it just tells the story in the voice. It's nothing artificial, just beautiful. And so I explained that to her, and so then we recorded something the next day, and couple of months later we formed this band, the Haar, which has got Murray on the right, Molly, Cormac and me, and we released an album to, people loved it, but then we haven't done any gigs because nobody has. We've got a couple of festivals booked this year, which is great. Let's hope it continues. But her voice is just magic, I think.
And we're going to have the first of our 4 videos now. And this is the Haar, not a Haar, but the Haar. And black is the colour. The Haar, black is the colour, featuring the wonderful voice of Molly Donnery, who I think is a real discovery. I mean, maybe the second time I've heard that, but it's just shiver down the spine time again, isn't it?
Yeah. That's what I heard in the pub, and just thought, this is amazing. It's fantastic. On the album we did that you just heard, we recorded in January, each in our own rooms at the other side of the Irish Sea from each other.
Now, I mean, you said that you haven't performed live yet. Have you got any bookings for when we come out the other end of
we've got
the plague?
The Haar has got we're doing the Bardi Festival in June, which is quite a big thing on the folk circuit, so that's nice. That'll be our first ever performance live. And then we've been invited to a big festival in Portugal in, I don't know, maybe it's October, which may or may not happen. I hope it will, but we'll see. And as for other than that, I've got not much. Red Priest has got a couple of things that have just come back out of the woodwork for the summer, but there's been no more bookings made during the period when nobody's known what's going on. So, and there's certainly nothing abroad. Ciderhouse Rebellion with Murray has got a few things coming in, but the world it's just been stasis. Nobody's known what to do. Oh, and I'll be playing my violin concerto with the Helix Ensemble in February sometime, which will be nice.
Your violin concerto?
I wrote a violin concerto. Actually, it's what caused the pandemic. I played it about a week before everything closed. So I have noticed a causal link.
Is composition something new for you, or is it something you've always done?
I've always written stuff, and I don't know, I'm trying to think how many discs I've got my music on, but it's probably 10 or 15 of sometimes just arrangements, sometimes very gypsy or gypsy tango stuff, sometimes very classical things. There's a piece for solo accordion and strings, for example, that I can remember. So no, I've always written. Oh, I wrote a recorder concerto for that girl, Charlotte Barber Condini, the first recorder player to win the Young Musician, or one, I can't remember if she won it. She won the wind bit or something. Anyway, she was a lovely player. She played that. And Helix commissioned me to write a violin concerto.
That's really wonderful. And I mean, this is a dumb question, but can you say something about the style of it? Is it in the big romantic style that you clearly like, or is it in some other sound?
It's very hard to know when you've written it yourself, but if I had to put it somewhere, it's in a sound world somewhere between Stravinsky, Prokofiev, maybe, possibly and some of the slightly more folky stuff, it falls in
We
the middle.
We shall look forward to hearing that, Adam. You've mentioned that you have to approach whatever style of music you're doing in much the same way, and you've got to be serious about it and get the best out of your instrument. But one of the things presumably that does change is that when you're playing to a classical audience, it's a rather different kettle of fish from when you're playing to, the O2 Arena or a folk audience.
Well, the O2 Arena is definitively different. That's for sure. I don't take it as being very different. It's more different if you're walking on stage to lead a symphony orchestra, or going onto the Wigmore Hall platform or something. But even there, I like to, the second one, if you're doing a chamber music thing, the more you can naturally bring the audience to you. I'm not particularly a fan of the separation between artist and audience vibe. I don't really like the penguin suit and that you have to sit over there and clap like this. I prefer it to be more of a continuum, really. And so for me, yeah, there can be a difference, but it's more a difference of degree than type, perhaps.
Yeah.
Certainly Red Priest's concerts, which you are going to perform to a classical audience, but we make it much less so immediately. And I've done that throughout, even with the most serious things, just finding a way to make an engagement and make everybody part of it a bit more.
Well, I think
that myself.
I think one of the wonderful kind of developments in classical music is having pre-concert talk, so you can get to know the musicians and get to know the conductor and things. I mean, the idea of Otto Klemperer sitting down and being subjected to a pre-concert talk would be unthinkable, because conductors were these kind of gods in those days, whereas I think things have loosened up a little bit since then.
Yeah, sometimes you feel
know that.
Sorry, say that again, John. I
think there's more, perhaps there's more informality to come.
Perhaps. Yeah, I think perhaps, but I like it. It's not. It doesn't have to undermine the seriousness. You can say what you like, but then when you play, the playing of whatever it is has to be real. Whether that's serious or not, perhaps depends on exactly what the music is, but it has to be genuine.
You've mentioned the Ciderhouse Rebellion.
Yes.
And the rebellion is against, who would have thought that people would be rebelling against real ale? I can remember.
Well, not against real ale, against over-hopped real ale. Different. There's been a lurch towards too many hops in the last few years, and that's depressing for me. Yes.
Tell us about the Ciderhouse Rebellion.
Well, basically, we got a few things going, and then lockdown and doom and woe happened, and we decided to find a way of carrying on. So our stuff is improvised, basically. There might be a starting tune, a folk tune that either we've written or that is a real old folk tune, but everything else is improvised. And so we need to be able to hear ourselves in exactly real time, which you cannot through any digital medium, in fact, unless you've got one of the ultra fast connections and you're basically living in the same room as somebody anyway. So we discovered that the only thing that doesn't have lag is the old-fashioned telephone. So we rigged up this appalling system with microphones going into a telephone and back out again. So we then played together live, improvising 60 miles apart or whatever it is, and put on a live show every week for quite a few weeks. It's the only music that either of us were able to do. And so the whole thing grew and became something quite special. We released 2 discs last year. We've just been actually commissioned to do a BBC audio drama soundtrack, which is a really nice development. And that actually has come about purely from doing these things on Facebook, bizarrely. Releasing a program a week, and people start to know about you, and we have become something over the period of not being able to perform anywhere.
Well, the piece we're going to hear is called The Whitby Rose, and there is a story about Whitby, which we will hear when we've heard it. So here is the Ciderhouse Rebellion and The Whitby Rose. The Ciderhouse Rebellion, The Whitby Rose, and Adam, gloriously evocative film there, the monochrome film. Tell us about that, if you will, please.
Well, this it always comes back to family again. That's my grandpa's film. He filmed it, and that's his boat being built, or a boat being built for his company. He was a fisherman as well as a violinist. That boat, in fact, is called the Stakesby Rose, but I named the track after my mother, who I've decided is the Whitby Rose, because she actually launched it, which you see in the slightly longer version of the film. And she's always been my most encouraging influence, so I thought she needed a track. And that track actually, it's amazing listening to it. That's in 13/8, and every 8th bar is in 7/8, which I actually just first of all wrote the melody almost as a joke to see if you could do that, and then said to Mario, let's play it. So I'm improvising with him. He's improvising in that bizarre sequence of time signatures. That's quite some musicianship.
It's a wonderful bit of film, wonderful piece of music, and of course, it looks like a skeleton.
Yes, extraordinary,
built, doesn't it? Wonderful. I don't quite know what's happened to my picture. On my screen, I look as though I'm, Marley's ghost coming through the wall or something. But
well, it's very fetching. It suits you. It looks all right here.
Oh, does it? Oh, well, all right. Again, the Ciderhouse rules, presumably something that you hope very much indeed will take off once everything's back to normal again, if it ever comes.
Yeah, we've got some gigs coming up. As I said, we've got the BBC commission. That's brilliant. And we've got we're doing a filming project in Rosedale in the North York Moors. Kind of history, music, and also we'll come on to that in a minute. Poetry with my daughter, and we've got an Arts Council grant from that for that. So this week has actually brought some fairly positive news after a year of not doing a lot, really.
But so, presumably you play your violin every day, I take it?
No, I only ever play my violin if I've got a concert.
Really?
Yeah, unless I actually have to learn something new.
Oh, right, okay. I was under the impression that you had to keep your hand in.
No. I did a lot of practice when I was young. It still hangs over a bit. Although I have to say, actually, I am needing to do a little bit more playing, because a year of hardly playing, I can feel the difference.
Yes.
Historically, I've only ever practiced for the last 15, 20 years to learn something.
Do you find that your violin actually sounds a bit different depending on, the temperature, the whole?
Oh, yeah. My fiddle really likes dry summer weather. That's when it sounds its best. It's still beautiful all the time, but in colder weather, the sound becomes a little bit more contained, a little bit more glossy maybe. Whereas when it's really warm and open, you can feel the wood just vibrating, and it really sings. And also bizarrely, the resin works a little bit better. It's a little bit softer. It's just a better time to play.
Andrew Constantine once told me that there is an orchestra, I think he conducted it, which is, beyond the Arctic Circle. Because it's freezing there, and the musicians have to be incredibly careful of their instrument.
Yeah, I mean, except that when you go to, I played in Alaska in the middle of winter. Actually, no, yes, and we went to Fairbanks, which is the capital, is only just below the Arctic Circle. There's a meter of snow. Everything's as cold as it could possibly be. But then everybody's sorted out indoors. They're kind of warmer in the house than we tend to be here. So I didn't actually have any problem. That violin has been there and returned without anything too desperate happening to it. It's more dangerous in Guernsey when the fingerboard fell off.
We're going to hear another tune from the Ciderhouse Rebellion, but one of the things you've been doing in lockdown is experimenting with animation for a video for this next piece, and there we are, that's the look of it. How did that come about?
Well, it was basically Murray's fault, or my fault, depending how you look at it. We'd recorded a track and we'd had it mastered, ready for release as a single. And such is the way of things that even for most single releases, you need a video to go with it. So he said, it's okay, because everything we've been doing video as we're doing it. Let's just put the videos on. But then mine had inexplicably been deleted by someone, arguably me. And he said, well, you'd better do an animation then, hadn't you? Half joking and half knowing that I would like the idea. And so I did. And the animation, the tune it's an old Sorbian tune. The Sorbs are a people in the middle of kind of halfway between Germany and the Czech Republic, a kind of persecuted minority for a long time. And it's called The Skinny Orphan, translated, more or less anyway. Somehow the Skinny Orphan in the film you'll see has pretty much become my daughter, apart from with different hair colour. And you'll also see her most hated and feared animal.
Right, let's watch and listen to The Skinny Orphan. Oh, there we are. How long did that keep you occupied, devising that animation?
Well, that was January, but January was a woeful and dark, boring month with absolutely nothing to do. So I was happy to do it, although I have to say the program nearly blew up my computer, which made it harder than it would have been otherwise.
Does your daughter feel happy to be the Skinny Orphan?
I don't know if she knows she's the Skinny Orphan. She might be finding out at this very moment, but she certainly knows that the wolf is there to persecute her.
We're rapidly coming to the end of this part of the programme. Can I just remind you that if you'd like to ask a question of Adam, we will have an opportunity after we've heard the next piece of music. So do get your thinking caps on to ask something of him, and I'll explain how you can make clear the fact that you want to ask a question in a moment. But Adam, just before that, I mean, I don't like to keep going on about lockdown and everything, but this must be, for you and for every other musician, an extremely difficult time, because there is just no certainty, is there?
Oh, no. I mean, it's a dodgy time throughout, but you can decide to weather a period of time. But it's so difficult to tell what we're coming back to, really. I mean, Red Priest was a huge part of my career 2 years ago. Most of that was touring abroad. Well, we will not be in the near future. So it's hard to know what happens with that. It's hard to know what happens with any of the normal things I was doing. Some of this new stuff I'm doing is brilliant and lovely, and it has outlets in the world. Potentially, some of those might be a little bit easier to get going. We'll see. It's a difficult time for everybody. I can't imagine how most musicians are coping. I'm not sure just how you can.
But we hope very much indeed the Bardi will be back.
We do in the
autumn.
Yes, and I'm not discounting the Bardi. It's just the Bardi is its own thing.
Yeah, sure.
Me knowing my way in the world, the Bardi will survive with or without me.
But you're always there for the Bardi these days. You must enjoy it.
I do, for all sorts of reasons. I'm there very deliberately. It gets put in my diary immediately, and I only don't do a concert actually if I have to do, which probably isn't going to happen in the near future, one of the foreign tours cuts across it by necessity. Bardi for me it's all sorts of things. It's a link back to childhood in Leicester playing in orchestras, so that's nice. It's a community of people that one way or another I've known for 20-something years, 24 years, something like that, maybe longer. My maths is fairly ropey, so I'm not sure. But that's important, and it's also, this isn't as important now to me as it was, but during the period when I was directing the little London Chamber Orchestra and touring around playing with so many different professional musicians, it was such a beautiful thing to come and play with a hall full of people who were there purely for the love of the music, not because they were making a living from it. So for all those reasons, yeah, Bardi is important for me. And also to be able to play the Rite at Spring or Janacek Sinfonietta or whatever we're about to do next, be on stage surrounded by that music. It isn't something that's ever going to be part of my professional career, because I'm just not down that path. So it's beautiful to be doing it for Bardi.
Bit of magic. Adam, you mentioned earlier on your daughter Jessie, who came onto the stage.
Yes.
And gave you those flowers, and you were unmanned. We're going to see her as she is now for a lovely video, which I'd just like you to introduce for us, please.
Yeah, well, this is one of the good things that came out of lockdown. Jessie's always written poetry, but suddenly she's a poet. She listened to the sessions I was doing every week with Murray, and suddenly came along one week with a poem and said, I just thought maybe you'd like to read this over the top once you've played it. And I said, no, if we're going to do that, you read it and we'll do it live, which we did the next week. And then before we knew it, we'd released an album, and she's released a poetry book. She's got a poetry in another book you can buy in Waterstones called Viral Verses, I think. And she's written another book. We recorded another album 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we're doing this Arts Council project in Yorkshire, which her poetry is a kind of a third of the project. It's been a great thing to do. And it's sort of launched her into what looks surprisingly like a career path, which is a surprise and a lovely thing. So having begun with a story about her, it seemed appropriate to finish with this poem. Her poems are not always cheerful, and this one isn't, but it's... It is beautiful.
It is beautiful. To the Nightingale then, and we'll see Jessie speaking it with Ciderhouse Rebellion. Jessie Summerhays and Ciderhouse Rebellion. What a talented family. Adam, it's been a huge pleasure and a privilege to talk to you this evening. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Stay with us, please, because now is the opportunity for all the multitude of people who have been watching this evening to ask a question. And whilst you're doing that, I'll just have one more little question for Adam. I was intrigued about your saying that when you were young, you didn't necessarily learn things from listening to CDs or LPs or whatever. Do you listen to music of any kind, or recorded music these days?
Not much actually. Oh, there's some kind of echo back coming on. That's better. I listened far more when I was younger, because then when I was on the road so much, actually just too busy to listen to music, and also your head gets overfilled. Sometimes you just need to let it dribble out again. Yeah. So I do listen to music. I also hear a lot of music. I hear what Jessie might be playing in other parts of the house or whatever. But it's something I do less than I might, one way or another, primarily because I always seem to be making it.
Well, better to make it perhaps than to listen to it.
I don't know. As we listened to the Janacek Sinfonietta, I was filled with a desire to go to a fantastic concert hall and be with a fantastic orchestra and hear that. There are things that I would so love to hear live. I suppose I'm not so fond of recordings of big symphony orchestra stuff, and yet big symphony orchestra stuff is one of the things I really like listening to. I just find I don't have good enough, speakers and things for it to sound epic, and you just end up with a slightly canned version of it. It's a bit different with something that's small and intimate. That can work.
Okay, Adam, stay with us if you will, please, because we've got some questions for you, and I'm going to ask David, what is your question? Unmute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Hello, Adam. Thank you for your time and effort. Lovely to see your cottage in rural Derbyshire and all the rest of it. A little birdie, something distant past, told me that I think you're a Hollywood superstar. And you are, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a fact.
Go on then, explain it to us all.
It might be a slight exaggeration, but I am briefly in a blockbuster movie. I did a project with London Concertante, which was I wrote a whole bunch of arrangements and new compositions that went onto a disc for 2 solo violins and string orchestra, all Gypsy based. And Guy Ritchie was putting on the second film of the Sherlock Holmes thing that he did, which is called A Game of Shadows. And somewhere along the line, yes, there it is. Somewhere along the line, he came into contact with my music, probably through, they have people who sort of search music initially. And I was asked if they could use one of the tracks from the disc, which they couldn't, because it was the only one on the disc that was copyright, and they wanted it not to be. So then I was asked to go down and record a track to go on, which I thought, okay, why would I possibly not do this? I was on a train on the way to London to do that when I got a call from the agent woman saying, oh, they've cancelled it, it's going to have to be a different day. So I said, look, I'm nearly in London and we're not quite sure what's going on anyway. Why don't I just come down and have a meeting with Guy Ritchie and work out what's going on? And she said, because I don't think that's what people normally do. But then a couple of hours later, I went onto the set at Leavesden Studios, I think, and had a brief meeting with him about what he wanted for just a track, which was great fun. He looked mildly confused as to how it had all happened, but he was perfectly happy to talk to me. So I went away and wrote a couple of tracks. Then we went back a month later or so to record in, what's it called, Richmond Park, where they had a big live set. So he was there. It wasn't very clear to me what was going on. We'd turned up as the two musicians, my friend Emil, who you can see there, and I. And so I just went up to him, which again, I don't think is what you normally do, but it seemed the best way to me, and said, right, so what's the plan? What do you want me to do? And so we just had a little conversation. And shortly afterwards, a cameraman toddled up with a boom on his mic and said, right, well, play now. And so we played a track. Initially, he was just filming it because it was meant to be going with a track that was recorded later. But I said, why don't you just record it with the music as well? Because it'd be so much easier to sync. So he said, okay, that makes sense. Let's do that. Got boom and recorded us. Then we went through the rest of the day, and there's a point in the film where Watson punches a gypsy.
That's right. Yeah.
They went round the whole set of extras filming reaction shots. So my friend Emil and I ran around and got into the back of every single action shot, which we thought was funny to make sure we were definitely in the film somehow.
You can clearly see you're in it, definitely.
Well, then and so then the action shot, the reaction shot they ended up using was us going, yeah. There we are. So I saw that at the premiere in Leicester Square on the screen, and there suddenly was my face the size of a bus, which is brilliant.
So you've actually performed to more than 20,000 at the O2 when you think about it.
That is true when you think about it. The whole story was great fun, but there was also a better bit that ended up not happening, which is a shame. Yeah. But we went back in after Christmas sometime to again Leavesden Studios, but the indoor set where they'd recreated Richmond Park. It was astonishing. And then as we arrived, Emil and I, there was also a gypsy band there, which was strange. So we said, I don't know what's going on here. Because between the first set of filming and then, Hans Zimmer had been appointed as the music person, whereas nobody was appointed when I was there. So it became apparent he'd got a gypsy band. And so we didn't quite know what on earth we were doing. So I said, well, let's just join the gypsy band. So we went and played along with them.
Right.
They couldn't stop us doing.
Good for you.
And, but they didn't get used in the end at all. The music that was used in the end was that bit that was filmed of me in Richmond Park under a tree.
On the cutting room floor.
Yeah, so that's interesting. But Guy Ritchie also came up to me during this and said, could you write a track for Robert Downey Jr. to play and teach it to him in an hour? Yeah, that'd be fine. So an hour later, I was in his caravan to teach him a track, which I'd come up with, something simple. Actually, I went in and said, I don't know what we should, what we ought to do or something. And his wife, who was on set with him at the other end of the caravan, said, it's not what you ought to do, it's what you can do in the time. And I thought that was an extremely good point. So I taught him to mime to it, which he was actually brilliant at. So the violin you see there has actually been played by Robert Downey Jr. After a fashion. Then I recorded it live on set as his body double, and then he mimed to it, and it was all brilliant. But unfortunately, for the last month before the premiere, I kept getting messages saying, right, it's in, we need to sign the contract. Oh, no, it's not in. It's in, it's not in, it's in. And
the life of the movie violin.
So somewhere on the cutting room is Robert Downey Jr. playing my violin and
That's
me
a fantastic
miming.
story, Adam.
It would have been an even better story if I could have actually shown you it on screen.
That is a wonderful story.
Bardi superstar Hollywood.
David, thank you so much indeed for your question. Catherine, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Hi, yeah. I wondered if you wanted to share one of your stories where the violin doesn't quite make it to the gig on time.
Thank you. That, in case anybody doesn't know, is my wife. There have been occasions where, well, it's pretty much constant problem actually that I leave and get quite a long way to the gig to discover I don't have a violin. At which point either my support staff start driving very fast across the country after me, or I have to drive home and get back. It's difficult.
It's a common problem, isn't it?
It's a common problem, absolutely. I think she might be asked for thanks.
No.
Thanks are certainly due. I've been rescued many times.
You count support staff now then, do you, Catherine?
Obviously.
as does Murray, who takes his job as making sure that I haven't left the violin in a pub after a gig.
Oh, and your father as well.
Oh, and my mother, yes, and my father. My daughter, yes.
Catherine, thank you for pointing out these, downsides of Adam
Bit of a reality check there.
Good to hear from you, thank you. Jane, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Adam, thank you so much for sharing what you've just shared over the last 90 minutes or so. I've learned more about you than I have in the last 4 years of sitting behind you in the first fiddle section at the Bardi, I have to say. And it's been really enlightening and really interesting. So thank you very much. Secondary, we have Jagdish Mistry in common in terms of an acquaintance stroke friend, in that he was the visiting string quartet at York University when I did my degree there.
Oh, right.
So I spent a lot of time with them. And yes, that's another conversation I'm sure we can have in due course.
I haven't met him for years now, but we used to be very good friends.
Good guy, really good guy,
lovely
really good guy.
Beautiful musician, and yeah, I don't know how we became not in contact. It's just one of the things that happened.
No, well, we'll have to find him between us, I suspect.
Yes, that's a good idea.
I mean, my question is, I mean, I went to York University, did a music degree, thought I was going to do professional music, and then switched and did something completely different, but kind of kept the music thing. What was the moment that you decided that classical music was what you wanted to do as a career, and why?
I didn't ever really decide properly. I just always knew I wanted to be a violinist, and then somehow being a violinist meant being in an orchestra for a while because I was at the schools of music, and then it meant leading an orchestra, and then it meant going to college, and then it meant directing another orchestra and doing concertos. I only ever decided to play the violin. I didn't ever really consciously decide to be a classical musician as such. It just really happened, and I have loved a lot of it, most of it. I definitely understand all the people who go to college and then look with a clear eyes at the world around them and say, I'm going to do something else, because there's an awful lot about this life and this lifestyle that makes no sense whatsoever. But I don't think I was ever clear-eyed enough to see that, so I just blundered on. I
admire your passion, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. 3 of you have asked questions this evening. I don't think we've got any more. So let me just tell you that our next Bardi interview will be on June the 4th, when I will have the great pleasure of talking to the gentleman you see now on the screen, Robert Calo, gazing out at us as if on the front of his first CD. That should be something to look forward to. June the 4th, my conversation with Robert Calo. And you'll be able to see and hear conversation that I've just had with Adam on the Bardi website, and that should be posted by the end of next week. So do watch out for that. Meanwhile, let me thank once again Adam Summerhayes for sharing so generously some wonderful tales and providing us with an insight into his life. Thank you very much indeed, Adam.
Thank you, John.
And I'd like to thank also the technical team who have made this evening possible. They are Alan Haynes, David Kalo, and Robert Kalo. That's it for this evening. See you again on June the 4th. Until then, cheerio and take care.